Around 3500 BC in the fertile marshlands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, something extraordinary occurred that continues to baffle archaeologists and historians. The Sumerian civilization did not gradually emerge from primitive hunter-gatherer societies, as conventional models of human development would suggest. Instead, it appeared with startling suddenness, displaying levels of sophistication that seemed to defy the expected trajectory of cultural evolution. The archaeological record reveals that within a remarkably brief time span, the Sumerians had established complex urban centres, complete with multi-story ziggurats, intricate irrigation systems, and standardized weights and measures that functioned as administrative tools rather than religious monuments. What makes this emergence particularly puzzling is not merely the absence of clear developmental stages, but the nature of the records the Sumerians left behind. Unlike later civilizations that described their rulers as gods demanding worship, the earliest cuneiform tablets described the Anunnaki in administrative terminology as managers of territorial domains, resource extraction operations, and human labor forces. These beings are referenced with the detached language of bureaucratic records rather than the reverent poetry of religious devotion. The evidence we are about to examine reveals a startling possibility: that the Sumerians understood the Anunnaki not as divine beings worthy of worship, but as technologically advanced administrators governing Earth as a colonial outpost. The distinction between divine authority and technological superiority appears clearly in the earliest texts, before later cultures transformed these administrative records into religious mythology. If this interpretation holds, it fundamentally challenges our understanding of humanity's first civilization and the true nature of the relationship between the Anunnaki and their human subjects. The earliest cuneiform tablets from Eridu and Uruk, dating to approximately 3200 BC, contain references to the Anunnaki that differ markedly from later religious texts. These clay fragments use terminology that modern translators consistently render as administrative rather than devotional. Tablet W 20037 in the Vorderasiatisches Museum collection describes the Anunnaki not as gods to be worshipped, but as overseers who allocated resources, established production quotas, and managed human labor forces across designated territorial zones. The language employed mirrors modern corporate or governmental administration more closely than it resembles religious liturgy. The linguistic analysis of these earliest texts reveals a consistent pattern of terminology that emphasizes function over divinity. The Sumerian word dingir, typically translated as god in later periods, appears in these early contexts with connotations closer to administrator or authority figure. Tablets from the archaic Uruk period use compound phrases such as dingir kur, meaning mountain administrator, and dingir aab, meaning water system manager, that specify practical responsibilities rather than spiritual attributes. This functional terminology appears consistently across multiple independent tablet collections from Eridu, Uruk, and Jemdet Nasser, suggesting it represents authentic early usage rather than scribal error or regional variation. The administrative nature of early Anunnaki references becomes even clearer when examining resource allocation records from the Proto-Literate period. Tablets from Uruk Level 4, excavated by the German Archaeological Institute between 1928 and 1939, contain systematic inventories of grain stores, livestock counts, and labor assignments that reference Anunnaki oversight using purely bureaucratic language. These documents describe production targets, distribution schedules, and accountability mechanisms without any accompanying religious formulas or devotional phrases that would later become standard in Mesopotamian temple texts. The absence of religious language in these early administrative contexts suggests that the relationship between Anunnaki and humans was understood primarily in managerial rather than spiritual terms. Comparative analysis with later Babylonian and Assyrian religious texts reveals a striking transformation in how the Anunnaki were described. By the Old Babylonian period around 1800 BC, the same entities who had been referenced as resource managers in earlier texts were being addressed with elaborate devotional epithets, credited with supernatural powers, and presented as objects of worship. This linguistic evolution suggests that later cultures reinterpreted earlier administrative relationships through increasingly religious frameworks, transforming historical records of governance into mythological narratives about divine beings. The original Sumerian understanding of the Anunnaki as administrators became obscured beneath layers of subsequent religious interpretation. Archaeological evidence from the earlier Sumerian settlements supports this interpretation of practical rather than religious relationships. Excavations at Eridu conducted by Fuad Safar between 1946 and 1949 uncovered 17 distinct building levels at the site, with the deepest layers revealing architectural features designed for functional administration rather than worship. The earliest temple structures at Eridu contained storage facilities, accounting chambers, and what appear to be administrative offices rather than the elaborate ritual spaces that characterize later Mesopotamian temples. The practical organization of these spaces suggests they served as operational centers for resource management, rather than venues for religious ceremonies. The Sumerian administrative texts from Nippur reveal a sophisticated system of territorial governance that divided Mesopotamia into distinct administrative zones, each under the authority of a specific Anunnaki overseer. Tablet CBS 10,673 from the University of Pennsylvania collection provides detailed descriptions of these territorial divisions, specifying boundaries, resource allocation responsibilities, and reporting hierarchies that functioned as a bureaucratic structure. Anu controlled the northern highlands rich in mineral deposits, Enlil governed the central agricultural plains, and Enki administered the southern marshlands and their aquatic resources. The territorial boundaries described in these administrative texts correspond precisely with geographical features and resource distributions across ancient Mesopotamia. The northern zone under Anu's administration encompassed the mountainous regions of modern Kurdistan, where copper, lead, and other mineral deposits were concentrated. Boundary stones known as kuduru from the Kassite period preserve traditions of these territorial divisions, describing Anu's domain as extending from the Zagros Mountains westward to the upper reaches of the Tigris River. The specific geographical markers referenced in these texts, including mountain peaks, river confluences, and ancient roadways, can still be identified in the modern landscape, confirming the practical rather than mythological nature of these territorial descriptions. Enlil's central domain covered the agricultural heartland of Mesopotamia, between modern Baghdad and Nippur, encompassing the most productive farmland in the ancient Near East. Administrative tablets from Nippur, which served as Enlil's primary earthly seat, describe detailed agricultural management systems including irrigation schedules, crop rotation protocols, and harvest quotas that were implemented across this central zone. The texts indicate that local human administrators reported regularly to Enlil's administrative center at Nippur, providing production statistics, requesting resource allocations, and receiving technical guidance on agricultural optimization. This reporting structure functioned as a hierarchical management system rather than a religious cult, with emphasis placed on productivity metrics and resource efficiency rather than ritual observance or spiritual devotion. Enki's southern domain encompassed the marshlands and waterways of southern Mesopotamia extending to the Persian Gulf. This zone contained the earliest Sumerian cities, including Eridu and Ur, both of which show archaeological evidence of sophisticated hydraulic engineering and water management systems. Tablets from Eridu describe Enki's specific responsibilities for managing freshwater resources, maintaining irrigation networks, and overseeing fishing operations that provided protein for growing urban populations. The technical expertise attributed to Enki in these texts focuses on practical engineering knowledge, including canal construction methods, water purification techniques, and aquaculture management rather than supernatural abilities. The resource allocation responsibilities assigned to each territorial administrator reflect rational distribution based on geographical resources and population needs. Administrative texts describe systematic redistribution of materials between zones with northern copper and timber being traded for southern grain and fish through centrally coordinated exchange networks. Tablet VST 9555 from the Vorderasiatisches Museum preserves accounts of council sessions where these resource distribution decisions were made through deliberation among the territorial administrators. The language used in these accounts emphasizes practical considerations such as transportation costs, seasonal availability, and population requirements rather than divine prerogative or spiritual principles. The reporting hierarchies described in Nippur administrative texts reveal a multi-tiered management structure, with human intermediaries serving as local administrators under Anunnaki supervision. These human managers were responsible for implementing directives, collecting production data, and maintaining operational efficiency within their assigned sub-regions. The texts describe regular review sessions where human administrators presented reports to their Anunnaki overseers, received feedback on performance, and obtained guidance for addressing operational challenges. This structured oversight system mirrors modern corporate or governmental administration in its emphasis on accountability, data-driven decision-making, and systematic management of complex operations across extensive territories. Mesopotamian texts describe 7 primary Abgalu or sages who provided technical instruction to early human populations in agriculture, metallurgy, astronomy, and urban planning. Unlike later interpretations that characterize these figures as priests or mythological heroes, the earliest Sumerian accounts describe them in terms that suggest technical specialists or engineers. The text known as the Eridu Genesis, preserved on tablets from the Old Babylonian period, but clearly based on much earlier sources, describes these Abgalu as possessing specialized knowledge domains, rather than religious or magical powers. The first of these technical specialists, Adapa, is described in cuneiform texts from Ashurbanipal's library as having completed the plans of heaven and earth. Rather than indicating divine creative power, this phrase appears to reference systematic surveying and planning activities that established the geographical framework for subsequent Mesopotamian urban development. The text describes Adapa's specific responsibilities, including astronomical observations for calendar development, mathematical calculations for land surveying, and the establishment of standardized measurement systems that would enable coordinated construction and trade. These activities constitute the practical foundations of civilization rather than spiritual or religious achievements. The second sage, Uana, receives extensive attention in multiple Mesopotamian sources, including the accounts preserved by Berossus, the Babylonian priest historian writing in the 3rd century BC. Berossus describes Uana as an amphibious being who emerged from the Persian Gulf to teach humanity the foundations of civilization, including writing, mathematics, and temple construction. While Berossus's account contains obvious legendary embellishments, the core description of Uana as a technical instructor in practical skills aligns with earlier Sumerian sources that emphasize knowledge transfer rather than spiritual guidance. The text specifies that Uana taught the proper construction of temples, but the architectural instructions preserved in these accounts focus on engineering principles including foundation preparation, load-bearing calculations, and drainage systems rather than ritual requirements. The remaining 5 Abgalu, including Wanduga, Enmegalama, Enmebeluga, Anenlilda, and Utaabzu, each contributed specific technical knowledge domains that became essential to Mesopotamian civilization. Administrative texts from Nippur assign each sage responsibility for particular technological sectors, including irrigation engineering, metallurgy, textile production, astronomical observation, and agricultural optimization. The specificity of these assignments and their focus on practical knowledge transfer suggest these were actual technical advisors rather than mythological figures invented to explain the origins of various crafts. Archaeological evidence supports the interpretation of the Abgalu as technical specialists through discoveries of specialized workshop facilities at early Sumerian sites. Excavations at Tel Es-Sarwan, conducted between 1964 and 1968, uncovered workshop complexes containing sophisticated metallurgical equipment, precision measuring instruments, and astronomical observation tools that demonstrate advanced technical knowledge. The organization of these facilities into specialized production areas corresponds exactly with the knowledge domains assigned to the 7 Abgalu in textual sources, suggesting these individuals established actual training centers for transferring technical expertise to human populations. The linguistic evolution of the term Abgalu provides additional insight into how later cultures reinterpreted these technical advisors. The Sumerian compound Abigal literally translates as great water being, which later cultures interpreted as referring to fish-like deities or supernatural sea creatures. However, earlier contextual usage suggests the term may have originally designated specialists in hydraulic engineering, with the water reference indicating their expertise in irrigation, canal construction, and water management rather than their physical appearance or supernatural origin. This reinterpretation from technical specialist to mythological figure follows the same pattern observed in descriptions of the Anunnaki themselves. The training methods attributed to the Abgalu emphasize systematic knowledge transfer through practical demonstration and apprenticeship, rather than mystical revelation. Texts describe extended training periods during which human students learned complex technical procedures through direct observation and hands-on practice under Abgalu supervision. This pedagogical approach produced skilled craftsmen and engineers who could maintain and develop the technologies introduced by their instructors, ensuring that essential knowledge would persist even after the technical advisors departed. The success of this knowledge transfer system is evident in the technological continuity observed in Mesopotamian civilization across multiple millennia. Administrative tablets from Girsu dating to the 26th century BC preserve detailed records of production quotas, labor assignments, and resource extraction schedules that were established according to directives from Anunnaki overseers. These tablets, catalogued in the Louvre Museum's collection, describe systematic organization of human workers into specialized teams assigned to specific tasks including agriculture, construction, textile production, and metalworking. The precision of these labor management systems and their clear focus on productivity targets suggest industrial organization rather than religious service. The Girsu tablets designated as AO 3100 through 3200 in the Louvre's collection provide month-by-month accounting of labor deployments across agricultural, manufacturing, and construction sectors. These records specify exact numbers of workers assigned to each task, daily production targets for various activities, and actual output achieved during each accounting period. The systematic nature of this record keeping and its emphasis on quantifiable productivity metrics demonstrates a sophisticated management approach focused on optimizing resource utilization and maximizing output efficiency. The tablets make no reference to religious motivations for this labor, instead treating human workers as production resources to be allocated according to operational requirements. The agricultural labor records from Girsu reveal particularly detailed management of farming operations, including planting schedules, irrigation maintenance, harvesting quotas, and post-harvest processing. Tablet AO 3123 describes the organization of agricultural workers into teams of 10 to 20 individuals, each supervised by a human foreman who reported production data to temple administrators. The text specifies daily work targets measured in standardized units, including area cultivated, volume of irrigation water distributed, and quantity of grain harvested. These metrics enabled precise tracking of productivity and identification of operational inefficiencies, allowing administrators to optimize labor deployment and maximize agricultural output. Construction labor records demonstrate equally sophisticated management of building projects including ziggurat construction, canal excavation, and city wall maintenance. The tablets describe mobilization of large labor forces during specific seasons when agricultural demands were minimal, suggesting coordinated planning that maximized labor utilization throughout the annual cycle. Construction records specify not only worker numbers, but also material requirements, tool allocations, and completion deadlines that enabled project managers to coordinate complex activities across multiple work sites. The organizational sophistication evident in these records exceeds what would be expected from primitive religious communities and instead suggests industrial-scale project management. Textile production records reveal systematic organization of spinning, weaving, and garment manufacturing operations that employed predominantly female workers, organized into specialized production units. Tablet AO 3147 describes workshops containing up to 100 workers divided into teams based on skill level and production specialty. The text specifies daily production quotas measured in standardized units of thread spun, fabric woven, and garments completed, with individual worker output tracked to identify high performers and provide additional training for those not meeting targets. This performance management approach demonstrates sophisticated understanding of productivity optimization through systematic monitoring and skill development. Metalworking records from Girsu describe specialized facilities for copper smelting, bronze casting, and tool manufacturing that operated under direct Anunnaki supervision. These tablets indicate that metallurgical operations received priority resource allocations including fuel, ore, and skilled labor due to their importance for producing tools, weapons, and other essential manufactured goods. The texts describe quality control procedures including testing of metal compositions, inspection of finished products, and rejection of items not meeting specifications. This emphasis on standardized quality and systematic testing indicates industrial manufacturing approaches rather than craft production for religious purposes. The labour allocation patterns described in Gersu tablets reveal rational distribution of human resources based on seasonal demands, project priorities, and skill requirements rather than religious calendars or spiritual considerations. Agricultural labour peaked during planting and harvest seasons, while construction projects were concentrated during periods of lower agricultural demand. Specialised manufacturing, including metallurgy and textile production, continued year-round with stable workforce levels maintained through systematic training and skill development. This coordinated scheduling maximised overall productivity by ensuring efficient utilisation of available labour throughout the annual cycle. The Tablets of Destinies, referenced throughout Mesopotamian literature, take on new significance when examined as symbols of administrative authority rather than mystical artefacts. The Epic of Anzu, preserved on tablets from Ashurbanipal's library at Nineveh, describes these tablets as objects that granted their possessor control over operations and the ability to issue binding directives affecting both Anunnaki administrators and human populations. The emphasis on control over systems and personnel rather than supernatural power suggests these tablets functioned as credentials or authorization tokens within a hierarchical administrative structure. The Epic of Anzu provides the most detailed physical description of the Tablets of Destinies, describing them as shining objects that possess distinctive visual characteristics, enabling their recognition as symbols of authority. The text indicates these were not conventional clay tablets, but specialized devices composed of materials that gave them unique appearance and durability. The description of the tablets as speaking when activated suggests they incorporated some technological component that verified the authority of their possessor, possibly through sound emission or other observable phenomena that could not be easily counterfeited. The narrative of the Epic of Anzu centers on the theft of the Tablets of Destinies by the bird demon Anzu, and the resulting chaos that ensued when authority over operations became disputed. The text describes how normal administrative functions ceased when the tablets were removed from legitimate authority, with various systems becoming unresponsive to commands and directives failing to be implemented. This description suggests the tablets functioned as essential components of a technological control system, rather than merely symbolic representations of authority. The restoration of order only after the tablets were recovered and returned to legitimate authority demonstrates their functional rather than purely ceremonial role. The transfer of authority through the Tablets of Destinies followed established protocols described in multiple Mesopotamian texts, including the Babylonian text Enuma Elish. These ceremonies involved physical handling of the tablets by designated individuals who were authorized to exercise administrative control. The texts emphasize that the tablets recognized and responded only to properly authorized individuals, suggesting some mechanism for verifying the identity or credentials of those attempting to use them. This selective responsiveness indicates technological sophistication beyond simple symbolic authority tokens. Archaeological evidence from Mari provides physical confirmation of authority transfer ceremonies involving specialized objects that match descriptions of the Tablets of Destinies. Excavations conducted by André Parrott between 1933 and 1955 uncovered a throne room containing a raised platform with metallic inlays arranged in geometric patterns corresponding to descriptions of tablet activation ceremonies. The platform shows signs of intense heat exposure, indicating that authority transfer ceremonies involved energy discharge phenomena consistent with technological rather than purely ceremonial procedures. The precision of the metallic inlay patterns and their correspondence with astronomical alignments suggest these installations interfaced with broader technological systems. The administrative functions attributed to the Tablets of Destinies in various texts include the ability to issue binding directives affecting natural phenomena, human activities, and divine operations. Rather than interpreting these capabilities as supernatural powers, examination of the specific language used reveals emphasis on control over systems and processes. The tablets enabled their authorized possessor to modify operational parameters, redirect resource allocations, and implement policy changes across the entire administrative structure. These functions correspond to the authority exercised by senior administrators in complex organizational hierarchies rather than magical powers wielded by supernatural beings. Human intermediaries who received delegated authority through the Tablets of Destinies were not ordinary rulers, but individuals who had undergone specific preparation that qualified them for these responsibilities. The Sumerian king list describes these enhanced rulers as possessing capabilities and lifespans that exceeded normal human parameters, suggesting they received modifications that enabled them to interface effectively with the administrative systems controlled through the tablets. The transfer of authority to human intermediaries represented a crucial transition in the governance structure, enabling continued system operation even as direct Anunnaki involvement decreased over time. This planned succession demonstrates the administrative rather than mystical nature of the authority system, with emphasis placed on maintaining operational continuity rather than preserving religious traditions. The ziggurats that dominated Sumerian city-states demonstrate architectural features that suggest they functioned as communication installations rather than temples for worship. The Anu ziggurat at Uruk, dating to approximately 3200 BC, incorporates acoustic chambers, astronomical alignments, and geometric proportions that enable transmission of information across distances. Archaeological analysis conducted by the German Oriental Society revealed internal chambers containing resonance properties tuned to specific frequencies, suggesting these structures serve technological communication purposes within an administrative network. The foundation platform of the Anu ziggurat incorporates massive limestone blocks fitted together with precision measured in millimeters, creating a stable base capable of supporting the structure's 7 ascending levels. Each level was oriented to specific stellar configurations that were significant in Mesopotamian astronomical observations, with the primary axis aligned to the rising position of the Pleiades star cluster during the spring equinox. This astronomical precision required sophisticated surveying capabilities and mathematical calculations that enabled the builders to maintain exact orientations across the structure's massive scale. The geometric proportions governing the ziggurat's dimensions incorporate mathematical constants that appear throughout ancient sacred architecture, suggesting these buildings were constructed according to standardized design principles transmitted across different construction sites. The internal chamber system discovered within the Anu ziggurat reveals sophisticated acoustic engineering that created specific sound effects within enclosed spaces. Excavations by the German Oriental Society between 1912 and 1913 uncovered a complex network of corridors and chambers that demonstrate remarkable acoustic properties. Sound tests performed within these chambers by modern acoustical engineers revealed amplification effects at specific frequencies, particularly in the range of human vocal communication. The chambers amplify certain frequency bands while dampening others, creating conditions optimal for long-distance voice transmission or reception. The precision required to engineer these acoustic properties indicates advanced understanding of sound wave propagation and resonance phenomena. The positioning of acoustic chambers within the ziggurat structure corresponds with external architectural features, including openings and channels that appear designed to direct sound waves towards specific geographical locations. The orientation of these acoustic apertures aligns with the locations of other major Mesopotamian cities, including Nippur, Eridu, and Ur, suggesting the ziggurat formed part of a coordinated communication network linking administrative centers across Mesopotamia. The acoustic channels incorporate geometric designs that focus and amplify sound waves traveling in specific directions, while minimizing sound transmission in other directions, creating directional communication capabilities similar to modern directional antennas. The ziggurat's summit platform contained mounting points and metallic fixtures that indicate the former presence of large-scale equipment designed for astronomical observation or signal transmission. Archaeological investigation of the summit area revealed bronze fittings embedded in stone platforms with wear patterns suggesting regular rotation or adjustment of mounted devices. The positioning of these mounting points corresponds with celestial coordinates referenced in astronomical texts as primary navigation markers, indicating the equipment was used for precise stellar observation or perhaps transmission of signals towards specific celestial targets. Chemical analysis of metallic residues found in mounting points revealed bronze alloys containing trace elements that enhance electromagnetic conductivity, suggesting the equipment involved electrical or electromagnetic phenomena. Similar acoustic and astronomical features appear in ziggurats throughout Mesopotamia, indicating standardized design principles were applied across multiple construction sites. The Enlil temple complex at Nippur contains underground chambers with acoustic properties nearly identical to those found at Uruk, despite being constructed several centuries later. The Marduk ziggurat at Babylon, though built in a later period, incorporated communication chambers that followed the same architectural principles, maintaining compatibility with the earlier communication network. This architectural continuity across different time periods and construction projects suggests these features served essential functions that required preservation of specific technical specifications. Administrative texts from Nippur describe operational procedures for ziggurat communication systems during what they term the time of the Great Ascension. These documents detail complex coordination between multiple observation sites, with different facilities tracking various aspects of communication or astronomical phenomena. Observatory teams at Babylon monitored what texts call the star roads of the upper realm, while installations at Ur tracked southern pathways and facilities at Nippur maintained coordination functions. The level of coordination required for these operations suggests sophisticated understanding of three-dimensional navigation and real-time information exchange across considerable distances. The Sumerian development of standardized weights and measures represents one of the earliest examples of administrative systematization designed to facilitate resource management and trade monitoring. Archaeological discoveries at Ur and Lagash have uncovered collections of precisely calibrated stone weights that conform to mathematical ratios based on the base 60 system. These standardization efforts enabled accurate accounting of resources, production outputs, and trade transactions that would be essential for effective territorial administration by distant overseers. The weight standards discovered at Ur during excavations led by Leonard Woolley between 1922 and 1934 include complete sets of graduated stone weights ranging from fractions of a shekel to multiple talents. These weights demonstrate manufacturing precision that maintains tolerances within 2% across the entire range, indicating sophisticated quality control during production. The weights conform to mathematical progressions based on powers of 60, with each unit related to others through exact multipliers including 60, 3600, and larger factors. This mathematical consistency enabled complex calculations and conversions that would be essential for managing large-scale resource flows across extensive territories. The shekel weight standard, which formed the basis of the entire Mesopotamian measurement system, shows remarkable consistency across different cities and time periods. Stone weights designated as 1 shekel and recovered from sites separated by hundreds of kilometers and spanning several centuries show mass variations of less than 3%. This standardization required centralized authority capable of distributing reference standards and enforcing compliance across independent city-states. The administrative texts from Girsu reference regular inspections of weights and measures by officials who verified compliance with established standards and confiscated non-conforming instruments. This systematic enforcement indicates that standardization was viewed as essential for maintaining administrative control rather than merely facilitating commerce. The length measurement standards show equal precision and consistency, with standardized measuring rods recovered from multiple Mesopotamian sites, conforming to the cubit standard of approximately 52 centimeters. These measuring instruments, crafted from stone or hardwood, incorporate graduated markings that divide the cubit into smaller units, using the base 60 system. The precision of these graduations, with individual marks separated by less than 1 millimeter, enabled measurements accurate enough for sophisticated architectural and engineering projects. The cubit standard appears in architectural specifications for temple construction, irrigation canal dimensions, and urban planning layouts throughout Mesopotamia, demonstrating its universal application across different construction domains. Volume measurements for both dry goods and liquids employed standardized containers whose dimensions were precisely specified in administrative texts. Ceramic vessels designated as standard measures and recovered from temple complexes show manufacturing precision that maintains volume consistency within 5% across different production batches. These standardized containers enabled accurate measurement of grain distributions, oil allocations, and beer rations that were essential components of the administrative economy. The texts describe regular calibration procedures where standard vessels were compared against reference measures maintained in temple archives, ensuring that measurement accuracy was preserved over time. The base 60 numerical system that underlies all Mesopotamian measurements demonstrates mathematical sophistication that enabled complex calculations essential for administrative management. This sexagesimal system facilitates division by numerous factors including 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. making it ideal for practical calculations involving fractions and proportional distributions. The system's mathematical efficiency suggests it was deliberately designed by individuals with advanced mathematical knowledge rather than emerging through gradual cultural development. Modern mathematicians recognize the base 60 system as superior to base 10 for many practical applications, particularly those involving angular measurements and time calculations, where it remains in use today. Cuneiform tablets describe regular council sessions where Anunnaki administrators gathered to make decisions affecting human populations and resource allocation across Mesopotamian territories. Tablet Veit AT 9555 from the Vorderasiatisches Museum preserves accounts of these council sessions using language that emphasizes deliberation, voting procedures, and policy implementation rather than divine decree. The decision-making processes described involve weighing competing interests, evaluating resource availability, and reaching consensus through discussion rather than exercising absolute authority. The council meeting protocols described in Mesopotamian administrative texts follow structured procedures that ensured systematic consideration of issues requiring collective decision. The texts indicate that council sessions were convened at regular intervals following astronomical observations that determined optimal timing for gatherings. Tablet VAT 9555 describes opening procedures where the presiding authority, typically Enlil in his role as council chair, formally convened the assembly and established the agenda for deliberation. Each agenda item received systematic consideration with relevant data presented by responsible administrators before discussion commenced. The deliberation procedures emphasize presentation of factual information and analysis of alternative courses of action, rather than expressions of personal preference or divine will. Administrative tablets describe how council members, responsible for specific territorial zones or functional domains, presented reports on current conditions, emerging challenges, and resource requirements within their jurisdictions. These presentations included quantitative data on production outputs, population levels, resource inventories, and infrastructure conditions that provided the factual basis for decision-making. The texts indicate that other council members could question these presentations, request additional information, or challenge analytical conclusions before decisions were reached. Voting procedures employed by the Anunnaki Council followed protocols designed to build consensus, while respecting hierarchical authority structures. The texts describe a tiered voting system where different classes of decisions required different levels of support for implementation. Routine operational matters could be decided by simple majority vote among council members, while major policy changes required broad consensus including approval from senior administrators. The most significant decisions affecting long-term strategic direction required unanimous agreement among the primary territorial administrators, including Anu, Enlil, and Enki. This graduated decision-making structure balanced operational efficiency with appropriate deliberation for consequential choices. The policy implementation procedures described in council records emphasize systematic execution of decisions through established administrative channels. Once council decisions were reached, they were documented in formal resolutions that specified implementation responsibilities, resource allocations, timelines, and performance metrics for evaluating success. These resolutions were distributed to regional administrators who bore responsibility for executing policies within their jurisdictions. Follow-up procedures included regular progress reports, performance assessments, and adjustment of implementation approaches based on observed results. This systematic approach to policy execution demonstrates sophisticated organizational management. Recorded debates within council sessions reveal substantive disagreements among Anunnaki administrators regarding optimal approaches to human population management and resource allocation. Tablet Vet 17,019 preserves accounts of extended discussions where Enki advocated for continued direct supervision of human development, while Enlil argued for reduced intervention to encourage human independence. These debates involved detailed consideration of human capabilities, assessment of development progress, and evaluation of risks associated with different levels of oversight. The willingness to engage in extended debate and the consideration given to opposing viewpoints suggests genuine uncertainty about optimal policies rather than predetermined outcomes disguised as deliberation. The administrative separation between council deliberations and religious observances appears clearly in the contrast between council meeting records and temple ritual texts. Council records employ functional bureaucratic language focused on operational efficiency and resource optimization, while temple texts from the same periods use devotional language emphasizing worship and spiritual relationships. This linguistic distinction suggests that administrative governance operated independently from religious institutions, with the Anunnaki Council functioning as a secular governmental body rather than a religious authority. The concentration of council meeting facilities at Nippur rather than at major religious centers further supports this separation between administrative and religious functions. The Sumerian king list and related administrative texts reveal systematic efforts to cultivate specific human bloodlines that would serve as intermediaries between Anunnaki administrators and general human populations. Tablet CBS 13,294 describes selection protocols that evaluated humans for genetic compatibility, cognitive capabilities, and psychological traits suitable for administrative responsibilities. This selective breeding program appears designed to create a hereditary ruling class with enhanced abilities to understand and implement Anunnaki directives. The selection protocols described in Tablet CBS 13,294 involved comprehensive evaluation of candidate individuals across multiple assessment domains. Physical examinations measured cranial capacity, skeletal proportions, and other morphological characteristics that were believed to correlate with enhanced cognitive abilities. The texts describe measuring instruments and standardized assessment procedures that enabled comparison of physical traits across different candidates. These physical evaluations were combined with cognitive testing that assessed mathematical reasoning, spatial visualization, memory capacity, and problem-solving abilities. The systematic nature of these assessments and their focus on measurable characteristics suggests they were designed to identify individuals with genuine capability advantages rather than simply legitimizing existing power structures. Psychological profiling formed another crucial component of the selection process, with assessments designed to identify personality traits and behavioral tendencies suitable for administrative responsibilities. The texts describe evaluation procedures that tested candidates for traits including emotional stability, resistance to corruption, ability to maintain confidentiality, and willingness to prioritize collective welfare over personal advantage. These psychological assessments involved observation of candidate behavior under various challenging conditions including resource scarcity, conflicting loyalties, and temptations towards self-enrichment. Candidates who demonstrated appropriate psychological characteristics advanced to subsequent selection stages, while those showing unsuitable traits were eliminated from consideration. Genealogical analysis played a central role in the selection process, with extensive investigation of family histories to identify lineages that consistently produced individuals with desired characteristics. Administrative texts from describe systematic record-keeping of bloodline traits across multiple generations, with detailed documentation of physical characteristics, cognitive abilities, psychological profiles, and administrative performance for members of ruling families. This multi-generational data collection enabled identification of heritable trait patterns and informed decisions about optimal breeding combinations that would concentrate desired characteristics in offspring. The precision of this genealogical management demonstrates sophisticated understanding of inheritance principles. Marriage protocols established for selected bloodlines were designed to maintain and enhance desirable genetic characteristics while preventing dilution through random mating with general populations. Tablet VAT 16,742 documents elaborate marriage regulations that specified genealogical requirements for royal unions, including detailed compatibility assessments based on family trait histories. These protocols established minimum standards for genetic heritage, while also requiring complementary trait profiles that would produce optimal offspring characteristics. The texts describe formal marriage negotiations that involved exchange of genealogical documentation and verification of bloodline authenticity before unions were approved. The enhancement procedures described in these bloodline management texts extended beyond selective breeding to include what appear to be direct biological interventions designed to augment natural capabilities. References to ritual procedures involving special substances and exposure to specific environmental conditions suggest interventions intended to modify genetic expression or developmental trajectories. While the texts use ceremonial language to describe these procedures, the specificity of the protocols and their consistent association with enhanced capabilities in treated individuals suggests they involved genuine biological modification techniques rather than purely symbolic rituals. The results of these bloodline cultivation efforts appear in the distinctive characteristics documented for members of ruling dynasties. Archaeological analysis of skeletal remains from royal burials reveals morphological features that distinguish these individuals from contemporary general populations, including increased cranial capacity, distinctive skeletal proportions, and unusual longevity indicators. The Sumerian king list attributes lifespans of several centuries to early rulers, which may represent either literal extended longevity, resulting from genetic enhancement, or symbolic representation of dynastic continuity across multiple generations. Either interpretation supports the conclusion that ruling bloodlines possessed characteristics that distinguished them from ordinary humans. Mesopotamian creation myths, when examined as technical records rather than religious narratives, describe genetic modification procedures used to create enhanced humans, capable of serving as effective administrators and skilled workers. The Atrahasis epic, composed around 1700 BC but preserving much earlier traditions, provides explicit descriptions of mixing divine essence with earthly clay to produce beings with enhanced intelligence and specific capabilities. The precision of these descriptions suggests documentation of actual biological procedures rather than mythological invention. The Atrahasis epic begins its creation account with a description of conditions preceding human creation, including labour shortages among the Anunnaki themselves that necessitated development of alternative workers. The text describes how lesser Anunnaki designated as Agigi had rebelled against harsh working conditions imposed by their superiors, creating operational crisis that threatened resource production and infrastructure maintenance. This practical problem-solving context frames human creation as an engineering solution to a labour management challenge, rather than a spiritual or religious act. The emphasis on functional utility rather than divine creativity distinguishes this account from typical religious creation narratives. The genetic modification procedures described in the Atrahasis epic involve mixing what the text calls the blood of a slain god with clay from the earth to create the first humans. Modern analysis of this language suggests it may describe the combination of genetic material from Anunnaki sources with indigenous genetic material from existing hominid populations. The text provides specific procedural details, including the preparation of 14 portions of clay, 7 designated to become males and 7 to become females, suggesting systematic production of matched breeding populations. Each portion received an implantation of divine essence and underwent a gestation period before being brought to life through unspecified activation procedures. The goddess Nintu, working under Enki's direction, receives credit in the texts for performing these genetic modification procedures. Her role as birth goddess in later Mesopotamian religion may reflect historical responsibilities for biological engineering and human enhancement procedures. The texts describe Nintu as possessing specialized knowledge of biological processes and techniques for manipulating genetic material to produce desired characteristics. Her technical expertise rather than supernatural power enabled creation of enhanced humans who possessed capabilities exceeding those of unmodified populations. The texts attribute human intelligence, manual dexterity, and capacity for language to specific genetic contributions from the divine source material. The Akkadian version of the creation epic preserved in later Babylonian texts provides additional technical details about the genetic material used in human creation. The text identifies the slain god as Kingu, described as possessing intelligence and wisdom that would be transferred to the new beings through incorporation of his blood. The emphasis on transferring specific traits through genetic material demonstrates understanding of inheritance principles and the role of biological substance in transmitting characteristics from parent to offspring. The texts describe careful processing and refinement of the genetic material before incorporation into the clay matrix, suggesting understanding of genetic isolation and purification procedures. The creation account describes the results of these genetic modification procedures as producing humans who possessed capabilities that exceeded those of natural hominids. The first created humans, according to the Atrahasis epic, had lifespans of several hundred years, enhanced intelligence enabling rapid learning of complex skills, and the capacity for direct communication with their Anunnaki creators. These enhanced capabilities enabled them to serve effectively as administrators, skilled craftsmen, and technical specialists within the Anunnaki operational structure. The texts indicate that these enhanced characteristics gradually diminished over successive generations as the Anunnaki genetic contribution became diluted through interbreeding with unmodified populations, requiring periodic intervention to maintain desired trait levels. The systematic nature of the creation procedures and their clear focus on producing beings with specific functional capabilities distinguishes these accounts from typical religious creation myths. The texts describe genetic engineering as a deliberate technological intervention designed to solve practical problems rather than an act of spiritual significance or divine creativity. This functional interpretation aligns with a broader pattern of Mesopotamian texts describing the Anunnaki as administrators and engineers rather than gods worthy of worship. The creation of enhanced humans through genetic modification represents one component of a comprehensive administrative strategy for managing Earth's resources and establishing sustainable operational structures that could eventually function with reduced direct Anunnaki supervision. Administrative tablets from multiple Mesopotamian sites document extensive trade in what texts call sky metal, material collected from meteorite impacts and processed through specialized techniques. Silver tablet CBS 16,042 records transactions involving this material, described as more valuable than gold and possessing unique properties. The texts indicate substantial quantities were required for what they term the Great Vessels of Return, suggesting resource extraction served purposes beyond local Mesopotamian needs. The sky metal trade networks described in administrative texts from Lagash, and Gersu involved coordinated collection efforts across vast geographical areas extending from Anatolia to the Persian Gulf. Tablets from the early dynastic period document systematic searches for meteorite impact sites, with specialized teams dispatched to investigate reports of bright objects falling from the sky. These collection expeditions were organized and funded by temple administrations under direct Anunnaki supervision, indicating that acquisition of this material held priority status within the resource management system. The texts describe detailed procedures for identifying genuine meteoritic material, including tests for magnetic properties, unusual density, and distinctive metallic composition that distinguish sky metal from terrestrial ores. Processing facilities for sky metal were concentrated at major temple complexes, including the Enki Temple at Eridu and the Enlil complex at Nippur, where specialized workshops equipped with advanced metallurgical equipment refined the raw meteoritic material. Administrative records describe multi-stage processing procedures that involved crushing the raw meteorite fragments, separating metallic components from stone matrix, and refining the extracted metal through repeated heating and chemical treatment cycles. The texts indicate that processed sky metal achieved purity levels and compositional consistency that exceeded capabilities of normal ancient metallurgy, suggesting access to advanced purification techniques not documented in conventional archaeological records. The unique properties attributed to sky metal in cuneiform texts include references to its ability to capture and hold light, its resistance to corrosion even when exposed to harsh conditions, and its capacity to enhance the effectiveness of other materials when alloyed in precise proportions. Chemical analysis of metallic artifacts recovered from temple contexts and identified as potential sky metal components reveals iron-nickel alloys with trace element compositions consistent with meteoritic origin. These artifacts demonstrate manufacturing precision and material properties that distinguish them from contemporary Bronze Age metalwork, supporting textual claims about sky metal's superior characteristics. The economic value assigned to sky metal far exceeded that of gold or silver, according to price records preserved in commercial tablets from Kanesh and other Assyrian trading centers. Merchants' accounts describe sky metal commanding prices 10 to 20 times higher than equivalent weights of gold, with demand consistently exceeding available supply despite intensive collection efforts. This extraordinary value derived not from scarcity alone, but from the material's essential role in technologies that could not function effectively with substitute materials. The texts indicate that certain critical applications, including specific astronomical instruments and communication devices, required sky metal components to achieve necessary performance levels. The quantities of processed sky metal allocated to what texts call the Great Vessels of Return suggest these materials served purposes related to Anunnaki departure preparations rather than local Mesopotamian applications. Tablet CBS, 16,042 documents, cumulative deliveries of sky metal to temple storage facilities at Babylon, totaling several tons over a 20-year period during the late 3rd millennium BC. The texts specify that these materials were prepared for transport to locations not identified in normal trade records, with handling procedures that emphasized careful packaging and protection during movement. The scale of these accumulations and their evident importance to Anunnaki operations suggests they were being stockpiled for major construction or manufacturing projects related to departure vehicles or equipment. Administrative texts describe quality control procedures for sky metal that exceeded standards applied to any other material in the Mesopotamian economy. Each delivery of processed sky metal underwent testing that verified compositional purity, measured specific physical properties including density and magnetic response, and confirmed absence of contaminants that might degrade performance in critical applications. Batches failing to meet strict specifications were rejected and returned for additional refinement despite their substantial value. This exceptional quality emphasis indicates sky metal served functions where material performance was absolutely critical and where failures could have severe consequences. The Mesopotamian flood narratives, particularly the Eridu Genesis and the Epic of Gilgamesh, describe the Great Deluge not as divine punishment for human sin, but as a deliberate population management decision made by the Anunnaki Council. These texts indicate the flood was intended to reduce human populations that had grown beyond sustainable levels for available resources. The preservation of selected humans through advance warning and technical assistance suggests controlled population reduction rather than attempted extinction. The Eridu Genesis, preserved on fragmentary tablets from the Old Babylonian period, frames the flood decision within the context of resource strain and environmental degradation caused by excessive human population growth. The text describes council deliberations where Enlil presented data on declining agricultural productivity, depletion of forest resources, and increasing conflict over scarce materials that threatened the stability of Anunnaki operations in Mesopotamia. The decision to implement population reduction through flooding emerged from systematic analysis of carrying capacity and resource sustainability rather than moral judgments about human behavior. The administrative language used in these passages emphasizes practical considerations of resource management rather than theological concepts of sin and punishment. The Epic of Gilgamesh provides additional details about the flood decision through the account of Utnapishtim, who received advance warning from Enki and detailed instructions for constructing a survival vessel. The text indicates that Enki opposed the flood decision during council deliberations and chose to circumvent the policy by ensuring that selected humans would survive to repopulate the region after waters receded. Enki's intervention involved not only warning Utnapishtim but also providing technical specifications for vessel construction, guidance on selecting passengers and cargo, and instructions for surviving the extended period of inundation. The level of technical detail in these survival instructions, including precise vessel dimensions, waterproofing procedures, and provisioning calculations, demonstrates that preservation of selected humans was carefully planned rather than spontaneous. The flood implementation, as described in these texts, involved more than natural rainfall, but included what the Epic of Gilgamesh terms the opening of the dikes of heaven and the tearing up of the foundations of the earth. This language suggests coordinated atmospheric and geological interventions that generated flooding beyond what normal weather patterns could produce. The text describes how Anunnaki administrators deployed specialized capabilities to generate unprecedented rainfall while simultaneously triggering geological disruptions that released underground water sources. The systematic coordination required for these interventions indicates the flood represented a controlled operation designed to achieve specific population reduction targets rather than an uncontrolled natural disaster. Archaeological evidence from Mesopotamian sites including Kish, Uruk and Shuruppak reveals sterile flood deposits dating to approximately 2900 BC that separate earlier cultural layers from subsequent Sumerian civilization. These flood deposits reach depths of 2 to 3 meters and extend across the entire southern Mesopotamian plain, indicating inundation of extraordinary magnitude that would have eliminated surface settlements throughout the region. The uniformity of these deposits across such vast geographical areas suggests flooding resulted from coordinated causes rather than localized weather events, supporting textual accounts of deliberate intervention to generate the deluge. The timing of the flood, according to astronomical references in the text, corresponded with specific celestial configurations that were considered significant in Anunnaki operational planning. The Eridu Genesis mentions that the flood occurred when certain stars reached appointed positions, suggesting the timing was determined by astronomical rather than environmental factors. This astronomical timing indicates the flood was implemented according to predetermined schedule, rather than a spontaneous response to immediate conditions, further supporting interpretation as planned intervention rather than natural catastrophe. The survival instructions provided to Utnapishtim included specifications for preserving not only human lives but also domesticated animals, plant seeds, and craft knowledge that would enable rapid reconstruction of civilization after the flood. The text describes systematic selection of breeding pairs of essential livestock species, collection of seed stocks for major food crops, and inclusion of skilled craftsmen who possessed knowledge of critical technologies. This comprehensive preservation effort indicates the flood was intended to reset rather than eliminate human civilization, reducing populations to sustainable levels while maintaining the knowledge base necessary for recovery. Cuneiform texts describe detailed protocols established after the flood for rebuilding human civilization under modified Anunnaki supervision. The instructions of Shurupak provide specific technical information about agricultural methods, construction techniques, and social organization principles that survivors should implement. The systematic nature of these instructions suggests they were part of planned reconstruction efforts, designed to re-establish human populations at manageable levels with improved administrative oversight. The instructions of Shurupak, attributed to the antediluvian king Shurupak and preserved in copies from the Old Babylonian period, presents reconstruction guidance in the form of practical advice covering agricultural practices, social relationships, economic management, and governance principles. The text emphasizes sustainable resource use, including crop rotation schedules that maintain soil fertility, forest management practices that ensure renewable timber supplies, and fishing protocols that prevent depletion of aquatic resources. These sustainability principles address the resource management failures that contributed to the original flood decision, indicating that reconstruction planning incorporated lessons learned from pre-flood population growth patterns. Agricultural instructions in the text specify technical details about irrigation system construction, field preparation methods, and planting schedules optimized for Mesopotamian environmental conditions. The precision of these agricultural protocols, including recommended plow depths, seed spacing patterns, and irrigation water volumes, demonstrates advanced agronomic knowledge that enabled maximization of food production while minimizing environmental degradation. The texts describe how survivors should establish permanent irrigation networks with properly engineered canals, distribution channels, and drainage systems that would support stable agricultural production as populations recovered from flood-induced collapse. Construction techniques detailed in post-flood protocols emphasize planned urban development rather than organic settlement growth, with specifications for street layouts, building standards, and infrastructure systems that would create organized cities capable of supporting larger populations efficiently. The texts describe grid-based city planning with standardized building lots, integrated drainage systems, and designated zones for residential, commercial, and administrative functions. These urban planning principles enabled development of the sophisticated Sumerian cities that emerged during the early dynastic period following the flood, suggesting that post-diluvian urban centers were constructed according to predetermined designs rather than evolving gradually through incremental growth. Social organization principles outlined in reconstruction protocols established governance structures that enhanced Anunnaki administrative control while providing stable frameworks for human society. The texts describe hierarchical systems with clearly defined authority relationships, specialized occupational roles, and institutional mechanisms for resource distribution and conflict resolution. These organizational principles created social stability that facilitated population recovery while ensuring that human societies remained organized in ways that simplified Anunnaki oversight and intervention when necessary. Economic management instructions emphasize systematic record-keeping, standardized exchange mechanisms, and regulated trade practices that enabled accurate monitoring of resource flows and production outputs. The texts describe establishment of temple-based redistribution systems that collected agricultural surpluses, managed craft production, and allocated resources according to population needs and administrative priorities. These economic structures created transparency in resource management that enabled Anunnaki administrators to monitor human economic activities and intervene to prevent development of unsustainable consumption patterns that could lead to renewed resource crises. Religious protocols outlined in reconstruction instructions established ritual systems that maintained human awareness of Anunnaki authority while creating regular occasions for communication between administrators and human populations. The texts describe festival calendars, offering procedures and ceremonial practices that served dual functions as religious observances and administrative communication channels. These ritual structures enabled Anunnaki administrators to issue guidance, gather information about local conditions, and maintain presence in human consciousness even as direct intervention in daily affairs diminished over time. The implementation timeline suggested by archaeological evidence indicates that post-flood reconstruction proceeded rapidly, with new urban centres established within several generations of the deluge. The sudden appearance of sophisticated Sumerian cities during the early dynastic period approximately 2800 BC reflects the systematic reconstruction planning described in the texts rather than gradual organic development. The architectural sophistication, urban planning precision, and administrative complexity evident in these early cities demonstrates that reconstruction followed predetermined blueprints rather than emerging through trial and error experimentation. Tablets from the final period of direct Anunnaki presence in Mesopotamia reveal that their departure decision involved substantial economic considerations. Temple records describe increasing resource expenditures required to maintain earthly operations, supply chain difficulties, and personnel shortages that made continued presence increasingly unsustainable. Tablet VAT 17,019 preserves accounts of council debates where Marduk argued for continued involvement, while Enlil advocated for withdrawal based on cost-benefit analysis. The economic analysis underlying the departure decision centered on assessment of resource costs required to maintain Anunnaki operations on Earth, compared with benefits derived from continued presence. Administrative tablets from Babylon and Nippur document systematic increases in resource consumption during the late 3rd millennium BC, including expanding requirements for rare materials, growing energy expenditures for operating technological systems, and escalating labor costs for maintaining infrastructure. The texts describe how temple complexes required constant supplies of exotic materials, including specific types of stone, rare metals, and organic substances that were difficult to obtain in sufficient quantities through local extraction or long-distance trade. Supply chain disruptions emerged as critical factors influencing the departure decision, with texts describing increasing difficulties in obtaining essential materials from distant sources. Tablet records from document failed trade expeditions, disrupted caravan routes, and conflicts with regional powers that interfered with material acquisitions. These supply chain problems created operational constraints that reduced the effectiveness of Anunnaki administrative systems and increased the costs of maintaining functional capabilities. The texts indicate that some technological systems required materials that could only be obtained from sources outside Mesopotamia, or even beyond Earth itself, creating dependencies that became increasingly difficult to sustain. Personnel shortages represented another significant factor in the departure decision, with administrative records describing declining numbers of Anunnaki individuals available for earthly assignments. The texts indicate that maintaining operations in Mesopotamia required personnel to be deployed away from other locations or duties, creating opportunity costs that made the Mesopotamian presence increasingly expensive in terms of overall organizational resources. Tablet VAT 17,019 describes council discussions where the question of personnel allocation to Earth operations versus other priorities became a central point of debate between those favoring continued involvement and those advocating withdrawal. The council debate preserved in Tablet VAT 17,019 reveals fundamental disagreements about whether continued Anunnaki presence in Mesopotamia remained justified, given escalating costs and diminishing returns. Marduk's arguments for continued involvement emphasized the investments already made in developing human civilizations, the strategic importance of Earth's resources, and the risks that premature withdrawal might waste centuries of effort in establishing administrative systems and cultivating human intermediaries. His position reflected concern that withdrawal before human capabilities reached adequate levels might result in civilizational collapse that would eliminate all progress achieved under Anunnaki guidance. Enlil's counter-arguments focused on rigorous cost-benefit analysis, demonstrating that maintaining current operational levels had become economically unsustainable given resource constraints and competing priorities. He presented data showing that human populations had achieved sufficient capabilities to maintain basic civilizational functions independently, making continued direct supervision unnecessary for preserving core achievements. Enlil argued that transitioning to a reduced presence model with periodic monitoring rather than constant oversight would enable more efficient resource allocation, while maintaining the ability to intervene if human civilizations faced existential threats they could not manage independently. The eventual decision to proceed with departure while maintaining limited guardian presence represented a compromise between these positions. The Council agreed to withdraw the majority of Anunnaki personnel and reduce resource commitments to sustainable levels, while designating specific individuals to remain as observers and emergency contacts. This approach acknowledged the economic unsustainability of current operations while addressing concerns about premature abandonment of human civilizations. The texts indicate this decision was reached through extensive analysis of human capabilities, resource availability, and strategic priorities rather than through exercise of arbitrary authority. Administrative records from the 21st century BC describe accelerated training programs established to prepare human temple personnel for assuming administrative responsibilities after Anunnaki departure. These programs covered not only ritual procedures, but also technical maintenance of equipment, astronomical observation methods, and communication protocols. The texts indicate this knowledge transfer was extensive and systematic, suggesting preparation for genuine transfer of operational authority rather than abandonment. The training curriculum described in temple administrative records from Ur and Babylon encompassed technical domains far exceeding normal religious education of the period. Students received instruction in advanced mathematics, including calculation methods for astronomical predictions, geometric principles for architectural design, and accounting techniques for managing complex economic operations. The mathematical training incorporated the base 60 numerical system and its applications to practical problems, ensuring that human administrators could maintain the standardized measurement and calculation systems established under Anunnaki supervision. Astronomical instruction formed a central component of the training programs, with students learning observational techniques, star catalogue usage, and predictive calculation methods that enabled accurate tracking of celestial phenomena. The texts describe how trainees spent years mastering the use of astronomical instruments, learning to identify specific stellar configurations, and developing proficiency in the mathematical procedures required for calculating planetary positions and eclipse cycles. This astronomical training enabled human priests to maintain the observational programs and communication protocols that required precise celestial timing. Technical maintenance procedures for equipment and facilities represented another crucial training domain, with detailed instruction provided on operating and servicing the technological systems installed in temple complexes. Students learned to calibrate astronomical instruments, maintain acoustic chambers and communication equipment, operate preservation systems in underground archives, and perform diagnostic procedures to identify equipment malfunctions. The technical sophistication of these maintenance procedures required understanding of principles including optics, acoustics, and material science that exceeded the documented knowledge of conventional ancient Mesopotamian civilization. Communication protocols received particular emphasis in the training programs, with extensive instruction on procedures for attempting contact with departed Anunnaki through the technological systems maintained in temple facilities. The texts describe how students learned the proper timing for communication attempts based on astronomical calculations, the operational procedures for activating communication equipment, and the protocols for encoding and interpreting messages exchanged through these systems. This training ensured that human administrators could maintain contact capabilities even after direct Anunnaki presence ceased. Written knowledge preservation formed another essential training component, with students receiving instruction in cuneiform writing, text copying procedures, and document preservation techniques. The texts describe how trainees learned to produce accurate copies of essential tablets, maintain archive organization systems, and implement preservation measures that protected documents from physical deterioration. This focus on written knowledge preservation ensured that critical information would survive across generations even if oral transmission chains were disrupted. The training duration extended across years or even decades, with students progressing through increasingly advanced instruction levels as they demonstrated mastery of foundational knowledge. Administrative records describe formal testing procedures that evaluated student competency before advancement to higher training levels and final certification as qualified administrators. This systematic approach to knowledge transfer and competency verification ensured that positions of responsibility were filled by individuals who possessed genuine technical capabilities rather than merely holding hereditary privileges. The selection of training participants prioritized individuals from the cultivated bloodlines described in earlier administrative texts, ensuring that enhanced genetic capabilities were combined with systematic education to produce maximally effective human administrators. However, the texts also indicate that exceptional individuals from general populations could gain admission to advanced training programs based on demonstrated abilities, suggesting that competency rather than genealogy alone determined access to knowledge. This merit-based component enabled the training system to identify and develop talented individuals who might otherwise have been excluded from administrative roles. Following the main Anunnaki departure, specific individuals were designated to remain on Earth in reduced capacities as guardians and observers. Tablet BM 78,942 provides a detailed roster listing 7 primary guardians by name and function, including Ningishzida as Keeper of Medical Knowledge, Ninhursag as Guardian of Agricultural Techniques, and Nabu as Preserver of Written Records. These guardians were tasked with maintaining minimal contact while ensuring critical knowledge would not be entirely lost. The guardian assignments described in Tablet BM 78,942 reflect strategic distribution of essential knowledge domains across multiple individuals to prevent complete loss if any single guardian faced incapacitation or other difficulties. Each guardian received responsibility for preserving and selectively transmitting specialized knowledge within their assigned domain, while maintaining protocols that minimize their visibility to general human populations. The text specifies that guardians would operate through carefully selected human intermediaries, rather than engaging in direct public interactions that might reveal their continued presence and create dependency that would undermine human independence. Ningishzida's assignment as Keeper of Medical Knowledge positioned him at the Gishbanda temple complex near Lagash, where he maintained reduced presence, focused on preserving surgical techniques, pharmaceutical preparations, and diagnostic procedures that represented the most advanced medical knowledge available. The texts describe how Ningishzida would provide guidance to human healers through indirect communication methods, including symbolic dream sequences, carefully staged discoveries of preserved medical texts, and subtle interventions during critical treatment scenarios. His role emphasized ensuring that essential healing knowledge remained accessible to human practitioners while avoiding creation of persistent dependency on divine medical intervention. Ninhursag's designation as Guardian of Agricultural Techniques reflected her historical involvement in developing the intensive farming systems that supported Mesopotamian urban populations. The administrative records indicate she established reduced presence at multiple sites across the Fertile Crescent, including temples at Kish, Adab, and Shurupak, where she could monitor agricultural practices and provide seasonal guidance. Her interaction protocols involved communication through agricultural specialists, who served as human intermediaries, transmitting technical advice about crop selection, soil management, pest control, and irrigation optimization that appeared to originate from traditional farming wisdom rather than divine instruction. Nabu's crucial role as preserver of written records positioned him at the temple complex at Borsippa, where extensive libraries and scribal schools provided cover for his ongoing activities. The texts describe how Nabu worked through selected human scribes to ensure accurate copying and preservation of essential texts, subtle correction of transcription errors that might corrupt critical information, and gradual release of archived knowledge as human civilizations demonstrated readiness for advanced concepts. His position enabled systematic management of the knowledge preservation and transmission process, while maintaining the appearance of normal scribal activities within an established religious institution. The operational protocols established for Guardian activities emphasized observation and minimal intervention rather than active management of human affairs. The texts specify that Guardians should monitor developments in their assigned knowledge domains, identify situations where essential knowledge faced loss or corruption, and intervene only when critical capabilities were genuinely threatened. This restrained approach reflected the departure decision's underlying logic that human civilizations required independence to develop sustainable capabilities rather than remaining dependent on continued divine oversight. The Guardians functioned as safety mechanisms preventing catastrophic knowledge loss rather than as ongoing administrators managing day-to-day operations. Communication between Guardians and their human intermediaries employed indirect methods designed to maintain operational security while enabling effective knowledge transmission. The texts describe procedures involving symbolic communications through ritual contexts, carefully staged discoveries of preserved texts or artifacts, and guidance provided through dream experiences or meditative states that created plausible deniability about the source of transmitted information. These indirect communication methods enabled Guardians to influence human knowledge development without revealing their continued presence to broader populations who might respond by reverting to dependency patterns rather than developing independent capabilities. The Guardian system included provisions for periodic reporting and coordination among the 7 primary Guardians to ensure their activities remained aligned with overall objectives. Administrative texts describe scheduled gatherings at designated sacred sites, where Guardians exchanged information about conditions in their respective domains, discussed challenges encountered in knowledge preservation efforts, and coordinated responses to emerging threats to critical capabilities. These coordination mechanisms maintained systemic coherence in the knowledge preservation effort, while respecting the operational independence of individual Guardians within their assigned specialties. Sumerian texts from the Ur-3 period describe systematic construction of underground repositories designed to preserve essential knowledge and technological artifacts across potential millennia of human civilizational collapse. Tablet N 456 from Nippur temple records provides precise specifications for these chambers, including depths of 42 cubits below temple foundations, waterproofing methods, and environmental control systems. Archaeological investigation has confirmed the existence of these sophisticated preservation facilities beneath major Mesopotamian temple complexes. The construction specifications detailed in Tablet N 456 demonstrate engineering sophistication that exceeded normal Mesopotamian building practices through incorporation of advanced preservation technologies and materials. The prescribed excavation depth of 42 cubits, approximately 22 meters, placed the archive chambers well below the water table in most locations, requiring sophisticated drainage and waterproofing systems to maintain dry conditions suitable for document preservation. The texts describe multi-layer waterproofing using fired brick sealed with bitumen combined with clay barriers and drainage channels that directed groundwater away from storage chambers. The environmental control systems incorporated into archive chamber design maintained stable temperature and humidity conditions essential for long-term preservation of organic materials including papyrus, leather, and wooden artifacts. The texts describe ventilation systems using carefully positioned air shafts and thermal regulation chambers that maintained consistent internal conditions regardless of external seasonal variations. These passive climate control systems operated without requiring active maintenance or energy inputs, enabling them to function effectively across centuries of potential neglect during periods of civilizational disruption. The chamber layout specifications emphasized protection of stored materials through multiple redundant preservation strategies, including geographic distribution of duplicate collections, physical isolation of different knowledge domains, and progressive security measures that restricted access to increasingly sensitive materials. The texts describe how archive complexes incorporated multiple chambers at different depths and locations, with the most essential and sensitive materials stored in the deepest and most secure facilities. This layered approach ensured that even if outer chambers were compromised through flooding, unauthorized access, or other disruptions, core knowledge collections would remain protected. Archaeological investigation of the Nippur site has confirmed the existence of underground chambers matching the specifications described in Tablet N 456. Excavations conducted by the Oriental Institute of Chicago in 1956 uncovered the upper levels of an extensive underground complex extending far beyond known temple structures. The exposed chambers contained sophisticated drainage systems, evidence of environmental control mechanisms, and construction techniques that incorporated materials and methods not typical of surface architecture from the same period. The precision of the construction and the sophisticated preservation technologies employed demonstrate that these facilities serve genuinely critical functions rather than merely symbolic purposes. Similar underground archive complexes have been identified at other major Mesopotamian temple sites, including Eridu, Uruk, and Babylon, through ground-penetrating radar surveys and limited exploratory excavations. The architectural consistency across these different sites indicates they were constructed according to standardized design specifications, suggesting coordinated implementation of a systematic knowledge preservation network rather than independent local initiatives. The geographical distribution of these archive facilities across different regions of Mesopotamia created redundancy that protected against localized disasters while ensuring preserved knowledge remained accessible from multiple locations. The contents of archive chambers, as described in inventory texts, included not only written documents but also three-dimensional models, mechanical devices, preserved biological specimens, and material samples that demonstrated key principles through physical examples. The texts indicate that this multimedia approach to knowledge preservation recognized that written descriptions alone might prove insufficient for transmitting certain types of technical information across extended time periods when cultural contexts and interpretive frameworks might change substantially. Physical artifacts provided concrete reference points that could aid in reconstructing lost knowledge, even if textual records became difficult to interpret. The archive security systems incorporated multiple layers of access control designed to prevent unauthorized entry while ensuring that qualified individuals could gain access when appropriate. The texts describe mechanical locks requiring specific operational sequences, symbolic encryption systems requiring knowledge of specialized languages, and ritual procedures that served as cultural authentication mechanisms, verifying that access seekers possessed proper preparation and motivation. These multi-layered security measures protected sensitive knowledge from casual discovery, while enabling systematic revelation to individuals who demonstrated appropriate qualifications through their ability to navigate the access protocols. The mystery school traditions that emerged during the late Sumerian period show clear evidence of maintaining technological communication systems disguised as religious rituals. Underground chambers at Nippur contained elaborate arrangements of mirrors, crystals, and metallic objects that created visual and auditory effects interpreted as divine manifestations. Analysis of chamber acoustics reveals sophisticated understanding of sound manipulation that enabled skilled operators to create convincing communication scenarios. The ritual chambers discovered beneath the Nippur temple complex demonstrate sophisticated integration of optical and acoustic technologies that created dramatic sensory effects during ceremonial procedures. The chambers incorporated polished metal mirrors positioned at calculated angles that reflected and concentrated lamplight to create brilliant focal points interpretable as divine presence manifestations. Crystalline elements embedded in chamber walls refracted light into rainbow patterns and created shimmering effects that enhanced the perception of supernatural phenomena. The precise positioning of these optical elements required detailed understanding of light propagation and reflection principles that enabled creation of specific visual effects during ritually significant astronomical alignments. The acoustic properties of ritual chambers reveal equally sophisticated engineering that manipulated sound propagation to create effects interpretable as divine voices or supernatural communications. The chamber geometry incorporated curved surfaces, resonant cavities, and sound-focusing elements that amplified certain frequencies while dampening others, creating acoustic conditions that enhanced the intelligibility of communications from concealed operators while making their physical location difficult to identify. The texts describe how trained priests positioned in hidden chambers could speak in normal voices while participants in the main ritual space experienced their words as emanating from empty air or seeming to originate from sacred objects positioned at acoustic focal points. The integration of visual and acoustic effects created multisensory experiences that convinced participants they were witnessing genuine divine manifestations rather than theatrical productions. The text describes ceremonial procedures that coordinated lighting effects, acoustic phenomena, and symbolic actions to create coherent narratives of divine communication. Skilled operators synchronized these various elements to produce seamless experiences where visual manifestations appeared accompanied by appropriate sounds, and where communications seem to respond intelligibly to questions or offerings from ritual participants. The sophistication required for this coordination indicates that mystery school initiates received extensive technical training in addition to religious instruction. The technological components preserved in ritual chambers included devices whose functions remain partially understood despite archaeological investigation. Crystalline objects of unusual size and optical clarity appear designed to focus or transform light in ways that enhanced visual effects beyond simple reflection or refraction. Metallic implements with precise geometric forms and surface treatments show wear patterns consistent with regular use in procedures requiring exact positioning and orientation. The materials and manufacturing precision evident in these artifacts exceed capabilities documented for conventional ancient Mesopotamian craft production, suggesting they were produced using advanced techniques preserved within mystery school traditions or represented legacy equipment from the period of direct Anunnaki presence. The training procedures for initiates who would operate these communication systems emphasized not only technical competence, but also psychological preparation and discretion that ensured the technological nature of the effects remained concealed from unauthorized observers. The texts describe how initiates underwent years of instruction that progressively revealed the mechanisms underlying the apparent divine manifestations, with each level of initiation providing deeper understanding of the technologies involved. This gradual revelation process ensured that only individuals who had demonstrated appropriate commitment, capability, and discretion gained access to knowledge that could undermine the religious interpretations that protected the communication systems from interference by secular authorities or destruction by populations who might view them as deceptive rather than sacred. The functional purposes served by these disguised communication systems extended beyond maintaining religious authority to include practical transmission of technical knowledge, coordination between different mystery school centers, and potential communication with guardian Anunnaki, who maintained reduced presence in the region. The texts indicate that ritual procedures included both performative elements designed to impress observers and functional components that transmitted genuine information through symbolic languages and coded messages. This dual-purpose design enabled mystery schools to operate openly as religious institutions, while simultaneously functioning as covert networks for knowledge preservation and transmission. Babylonian astronomical texts preserve detailed calculations for predicting optimal return windows when Anunnaki presence on Earth would again become feasible. The Mulapin astronomical compendium contains precise stellar coordinates and timing calculations based on cycles of 3,600 years, suggesting long-term planning for periodic return visits. These calculations required understanding of orbital mechanics and celestial navigation that exceeded documented Mesopotamian capabilities by substantial margins. The 3,600-year cycle that forms the basis for return window calculations appears consistently across multiple independent Babylonian astronomical texts, suggesting this time period held genuine significance in Anunnaki operational planning rather than representing arbitrary numerological speculation. The mathematical precision with which this cycle is calculated, and its integration with other astronomical phenomena, including planetary alignments and stellar configurations, indicates it reflects actual orbital mechanics rather than symbolic religious time periods. Modern astronomical analysis suggests this cycle may correspond to the orbital period of a distant planetary body whose approach to the inner solar system would facilitate interplanetary travel by reducing energy requirements or providing gravitational assistance for navigation. The Mulapin Compendium provides extensive documentation of stellar positions, planetary movements, and celestial phenomena organized according to this 3,600-year master cycle. The text divides the celestial sphere into 3 pathways designated as the Ways of Anu, Enlil, and Enki, each containing specific stellar configurations that served as navigation markers for interplanetary or interstellar travel. The precision of the stellar coordinates preserved in Mulapin exceeds the observational capabilities attributed to naked-eye Babylonian astronomers, suggesting the data derived from either more advanced observational equipment or observations conducted from locations outside Earth's surface where different stellar perspectives would be available. The navigation markers described in these astronomical texts include stellar configurations that would only become visible or achieve significance when observed from specific locations in space beyond Earth's orbit. Computer modeling of stellar positions from various points in the solar system reveals that certain star groupings identified in Babylonian texts as critical navigation references cannot be observed from Earth's surface, but become prominent when viewed from the outer solar system. This suggests that the stellar catalogues preserved in Babylonian texts incorporated data from observations conducted during actual interplanetary travel, rather than being derived purely from terrestrial astronomical monitoring. The timing calculations for optimal return windows incorporate multiple astronomical factors, including planetary alignments, solar activity cycles, and galactic positional considerations that affect travel feasibility. The texts describe how return operations should be timed to coincide with specific planetary configurations that minimize energy requirements for orbital insertions and transfers between different trajectory segments. These calculations demonstrate understanding of gravitational assist techniques and optimal transfer orbit mechanics that would not be formally recognized by human astronomers until the 20th century space age. The sophistication of these orbital calculations indicates that Anunnaki departure and return planning incorporated genuine spaceflight engineering rather than purely symbolic or mythological concepts. The preservation of these astronomical calculations in Babylonian temple archives and their continued refinement by human astronomer priests across multiple centuries indicates that return monitoring remained an active priority for mystery school institutions long after the primary Anunnaki departure. The texts describe how successive generations of trained observers maintained systematic surveillance of the celestial markers identified in the return window calculations, recording planetary positions, stellar configurations, and unusual phenomena that might indicate approaching return activities. This persistent astronomical monitoring program suggests that expectations of eventual Anunnaki return were based on specific commitments or predictions, rather than wishful speculation about divine intervention. Mesopotamian prophetic literature describes specific global conditions that would trigger Anunnaki return, including environmental catastrophes, technological failures, and social collapses exceeding human management capabilities. Tablet BM 78,934 lists detailed criteria for crisis severity, including population decline thresholds, agricultural failure percentages, and warfare intensity levels. The systematic nature of these criteria suggests they were established as operational guidelines rather than religious prophecy. The crisis threshold criteria detailed in Tablet B, M 78,934 demonstrate quantitative precision unusual for prophetic literature through specification of measurable indicators that could be objectively assessed to determine whether intervention conditions had been met. Population decline thresholds are specified in percentage terms, with return intervention triggered if human populations fall below 70% of peak levels within a 50-year period. This demographic indicator reflects concern that catastrophic population loss might eliminate critical knowledge concentrations and skilled labor pools essential for maintaining civilizational capabilities, creating conditions where human societies could no longer recover independently from disaster impacts. Agricultural failure criteria specify return triggers based on both absolute production declines and geographical distribution of failures. The texts indicate that intervention would be considered if agricultural output falls below sustainability thresholds that prevent adequate feeding of existing populations, or if major breadbasket regions experience simultaneous failures that eliminate surplus production capacity. These agricultural indicators recognize that localized crop failures represent normal variations that human societies should manage independently, while widespread systemic failures might indicate environmental catastrophes exceeding human adaptive capabilities and requiring external assistance to prevent civilization collapse. Warfare intensity levels receive detailed specification, with return criteria tied to both the scale of conflicts and the technological sophistication of destructive capabilities employed. The texts describe how limited regional conflicts represent normal human political dynamics that should not trigger intervention, while global-scale wars employing weapons capable of causing permanent environmental damage or species-level threats would justify immediate return for conflict mediation. This distinction reflects understanding that human political development requires experience with conflict resolution, while preserving the species and planet from irreversible damage caused by uncontrolled application of advanced destructive technologies. Environmental catastrophe indicators include climate change metrics, atmospheric composition alterations, and ecosystem collapse measures that could threaten long-term planetary habitability. The texts specify temperature variation thresholds, pollution concentration limits, and biodiversity loss percentages that would trigger return intervention to implement environmental remediation measures beyond human capabilities. These environmental criteria recognize that some degree of human-caused environmental modification represents inevitable consequences of civilization development, while preserving the planet's long-term viability as a habitat for both human and other biological populations. Technological collapse scenarios receive attention as potential return triggers with criteria focusing on loss of critical knowledge systems and infrastructure degradation that reduces human capabilities below minimum sustainability thresholds. The texts describe how return intervention would be considered if essential technologies, including metallurgy, agriculture, or written communication, face extinction through knowledge loss, or if infrastructure systems including irrigation networks, transportation routes, or urban centers experience degradation that threatens population viability. These technological indicators reflect concern that human civilizations might regress to pre-urban conditions during crisis periods and require assistance to prevent permanent capability loss. Social breakdown criteria encompass governmental failure, institutional corruption, and moral decay indicators that threaten social cohesion and organizational effectiveness. The texts specify measurable factors including crime rates exceeding manageable levels, economic inequality reaching destabilizing proportions, and institutional trust falling below thresholds required for effective collective action. These social indicators recognize that functional human societies require legitimate governance, equitable resource distribution, and trustworthy institutions that enable coordination of complex activities across large populations. Systemic failures in these social domains could prevent effective response to other crisis conditions even when technical capabilities remained adequate. The systematic organization of these crisis criteria and their emphasis on objective measurability suggests they functioned as operational guidelines for Guardian Anunnaki, who maintained reduced presence on Earth. The Guardians would monitor global conditions against these specified thresholds and initiate return contact procedures if multiple criteria indicated that human civilizations faced existential threats exceeding independent management capabilities. This operational framework enabled Guardians to make informed decisions about when minimal observation should transition to active intervention without requiring constant communication with departed Anunnaki leadership, who might be engaged in activities at locations where rapid consultation was impractical due to communication delays over interstellar or interplanetary distances. Evidence from Egyptian, Indus Valley, and Mesopotamian sites reveals coordinated administrative systems suggesting these civilizations operated under unified oversight rather than developing independently. Identical standardized measurements, synchronized calendar systems, and parallel architectural principles appear simultaneously across vast geographical distances. This coordination required communication networks and centralized planning that transcended individual human civilizations. The standardized measurement systems employed across these geographically separated civilizations demonstrate mathematical relationships that cannot be explained through independent development or casual cultural exchange. The Egyptian royal cubit, measuring approximately 52.4 centimeters, corresponds precisely to multiples and divisions of the Mesopotamian cubit, through ratios based on the number 60. Archaeological measurements of precisely calibrated cubit rods, recovered from both Egyptian and Mesopotamian sites, reveal that these standards maintained consistency within tolerances of less than 2% across thousands of kilometers of separation. This precision indicates these measurement systems derived from common sources and were maintained through coordinated calibration procedures rather than evolving independently in isolated cultural contexts. The Indus Valley civilization employed measurement standards that integrate seamlessly with both Mesopotamian and Egyptian systems through mathematical relationships based on shared fundamental constants. Precisely graduated measuring scales recovered from Harappan sites at Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa conform to decimal divisions that convert exactly to Mesopotamian sexagesimal units and Egyptian royal cubits through simple whole number multipliers. The archaeological recovery of standardized weights from Indus sites reveals they conform to a system that meshes perfectly with Mesopotamian shekel standards, suggesting these civilizations participated in coordinated trade networks that required compatible measurement systems. The simultaneous appearance of these compatible standards across such vast distances during the 3rd millennium BC indicates centralized planning rather than gradual convergence through commercial interaction. Calendar systems employed by these civilizations demonstrate synchronized astronomical observations and coordinated timing mechanisms that required communication of observational data across continental distances. The Egyptian civil calendar, based on the heliacal rising of Sirius, coordinated precisely with Mesopotamian lunar calendars through intercalation systems that maintained alignment between solar and lunar cycles. The mathematical sophistication required to maintain this coordination across different calendar structures indicates systematic information exchange between astronomical observation centers in different regions. The Indus Valley Civilization demonstrates similar calendar coordination through architectural alignments and artifact distributions that correspond to astronomical phenomena significant in both Egyptian and Mesopotamian systems. Architectural principles shared across these civilizations include not only aesthetic similarities, but precise geometric relationships and construction techniques that required transmission of detailed technical specifications. The step pyramid form appears simultaneously in Egypt, Mesopotamia, and other regions during the early 3rd millennium BC, with examples showing identical proportional relationships and construction methodologies despite vast geographical separation. The mathematical constants governing these structures, including the golden ratio and pi, appear encoded in architectural dimensions, with precision indicating deliberate design rather than approximate aesthetic preferences. The structural engineering principles employed in these buildings, including load distribution techniques, foundation preparation methods, and material selection criteria, demonstrate technical knowledge that was transmitted across cultures rather than being independently developed. Urban planning layouts across these civilizations follow standardized grid patterns, with streets oriented to cardinal directions and public spaces positioned according to geometric principles that create similar organizational structures in cities separated by thousands of kilometers. Excavations at Mohenjo-Daro reveal urban infrastructure, including sophisticated drainage systems, standardized building materials, and zoned functional districts that parallel exactly the urban planning principles evident in Sumerian cities and Egyptian planned settlements. The appearance of these advanced urban design concepts simultaneously across multiple civilizations indicates they were implementing transmitted design templates rather than independently developing urban planning principles through trial and error. Trade networks connecting these civilizations required more than casual commercial contact to explain the depth of coordination evident in shared standards and synchronized systems. Archaeological evidence of trade goods, including Indus Valley carnelian beads found in Mesopotamian contexts, Mesopotamian cylinder seals discovered in Egyptian sites, and Egyptian artifacts recovered from Indus settlements, demonstrate sustained interaction across these regions. However, the sophistication of the coordination evident in standardized measurements, synchronized calendars, and parallel architectural principles exceeds what commercial exchange alone would produce, suggesting these trade networks operated within frameworks of centralized administrative oversight that ensured systematic coordination rather than organic cultural diffusion. Written language systems across these civilizations show structural parallels suggesting transmission of literacy concepts, even though specific scripts differ in superficial appearance. The hierarchical organization of writing systems with distinct sign categories for phonetic, logographic, and determinative functions appears simultaneously in Mesopotamian cuneiform, Egyptian hieroglyphics, and Indus Valley script despite radically different visual forms. The administrative applications of these writing systems, including inventory management, legal documentation, and astronomical record-keeping, follow identical organizational principles that enabled similar bureaucratic functions across different linguistic contexts. This functional consistency indicates that literacy itself was transmitted as a technological system, with specific applications rather than emerging independently in each region. Egyptian texts from the Pyramid Age describe divine rulers called Neteru using administrative terminology that parallels Mesopotamian descriptions of the Anunnaki. The Turin King List and Manetho's Egyptiaca preserve accounts of these beings establishing governmental systems, developing technologies, and managing resources across Egyptian territories. The functional descriptions and territorial assignments of Egyptian Neteru correspond precisely with the administrative roles attributed to Mesopotamian Anunnaki. The Turin King List, discovered by Italian explorer Bernardino Drovetti in 1822, presents chronological sequences that begin with divine rulers governing Egypt before human dynasties. The papyrus designates these pre-dynastic rulers as Neteru, with reign periods measured in thousands of years, and administrative responsibilities including establishment of agricultural systems, development of architectural principles, and creation of governmental institutions. The matter-of-fact language used to describe these divine rulers emphasizes their functional contributions to Egyptian civilization rather than emphasizing supernatural attributes or religious significance, paralleling the administrative terminology found in early Mesopotamian references to the Anunnaki. Manetho's Egyptiaca, composed during the 3rd century BC, while serving as high priest at Heliopolis, provides detailed accounts of divine rulers that complement the Turin King list, through inclusion of specific technological and administrative achievements attributed to each Neteru. The text describes Ptah as establishing principles of metallurgy and architecture that transformed the Nile Valley from primitive settlements into sophisticated urban centres. Ra receives credit for developing the calendar system and establishing astronomical observation programs that enabled prediction of annual Nile floods essential for agricultural planning. These functional descriptions emphasize practical contributions rather than religious or mythological attributes, presenting the Neteru as administrators and technical specialists rather than objects of worship. The territorial divisions described for Neteru administration of Egypt correspond precisely with the three-zone system documented for Anunnaki governance of Mesopotamia, Rusdom and Genet, and extended lifespans that enabled them to accumulate experience and knowledge across centuries. These physical characteristics correspond with Mesopotamian descriptions of Anunnaki as beings who differed from humans in measurable ways, including enhanced capabilities and longevity. The consistency of these physical descriptions across independent Egyptian and Mesopotamian sources suggests they refer to the same population of administrators operating in different geographical regions rather than representing independent mythological traditions. Archaeological evidence from Egyptian pre-dynastic sites, including Hierakonpolis and Abydos, reveals technological sophistication and organizational capabilities that appeared suddenly during the late 4th millennium BC without clear developmental stages. The Nama palette and other artifacts from this period demonstrate fully developed hieroglyphic writing, sophisticated artistic conventions, and complex political organizations that lack archaeological evidence of gradual evolution. This sudden appearance of advanced capabilities parallels exactly the pattern observed in Mesopotamia, where Sumerian civilization emerged with complete technological and administrative systems rather than showing gradual development from simpler precursors. The coordination between Egyptian and Mesopotamian divine administrations appears in shared iconographic motifs, parallel mythological narratives, and synchronized timing of major cultural developments. The serpent symbolism, prominent in both traditions, carries identical meanings and appears in similar contexts, suggesting transmission from common sources rather than independent symbolic development. Flood narratives in both Egyptian and Mesopotamian traditions describe similar events, with matching chronological references and parallel survival accounts. The simultaneous emergence of advanced civilizations in both regions during the late 4th millennium BC indicates coordinated implementation of development plans rather than coincidental parallel evolution. The mystery school traditions established across the ancient world functioned as systematic knowledge preservation networks, maintaining technical information through encoded teachings and practical demonstrations. The Eleusinian mysteries, Egyptian temple schools, and Mesopotamian priestly colleges all employed similar organizational structures, initiation procedures, and curriculum designs suggesting coordination under standardized protocols. These institutions preserved astronomical, mathematical, and technological knowledge across civilizational transitions. The organizational structures of mystery schools across different cultures demonstrate remarkable consistency in hierarchical arrangements, initiation progressions, and knowledge distribution protocols that suggest implementation of standardized institutional models. The Eleusinian mysteries conducted at Eleusis near Athens for nearly 2,000 years, from approximately 1450 BC to 392 AD, employed three-stage initiation systems that progressively revealed advanced knowledge to qualified candidates. Egyptian temple schools at Heliopolis and Memphis utilized identical three-tier structures, with initiates advancing through levels of instruction as they demonstrated competency and commitment. Mesopotamian priestly colleges at Nippur and Babylon implemented parallel hierarchical systems with knowledge distributed across graduated initiation levels. This structural consistency across independent cultural contexts indicates these institutions followed transmitted templates rather than independently developing similar organizational forms. The initiation procedures employed by mystery schools incorporated common elements including ritual purification, symbolic death and rebirth experiences, and progressive revelation of encoded knowledge that created consistent psychological transformations across different cultural implementations. The lesser and greater mysteries at Eleusis involved extended preparation periods, sensory deprivation and stimulation techniques, and dramatic ritual performances that produce profound psychological effects on initiates. Egyptian temple initiations employed similar procedures including isolation periods, symbolic journeys through underworld realms, and exposure to dramatic revelations that transformed initiates' understanding of reality. These parallel procedures created comparable psychological states that enhanced receptivity to transmitted knowledge and created profound commitment to preserving the mysteries from unauthorized disclosure. The curriculum content preserved within mystery schools focused consistently on astronomical observation, mathematical calculation, architectural design, and technological procedures that exceeded the knowledge available through conventional education in their respective cultures. Mystery school initiates received instruction in advanced astronomy, including stellar coordinate systems, planetary motion calculations, and eclipse prediction methods that required sophisticated mathematical capabilities. Geometric principles taught within these institutions included relationships between circles, triangles, and other forms that encoded fundamental mathematical constants and enabled precise architectural design. Technological knowledge transmitted through mystery schools encompassed metallurgical techniques, chemical procedures, and mechanical principles that produced capabilities unavailable to non-initiates. The encoding methods used to preserve knowledge within mystery school teachings employed multiple layers including symbolic representations, mathematical relationships, and ritual procedures that concealed technical information within apparently religious narratives and ceremonial practices. Mythological stories transmitted within these traditions contained encoded astronomical data with divine characters representing celestial bodies and narrative events corresponding to planetary movements or stellar configurations. Ritual procedures incorporated practical technical operations disguised as religious ceremonies, with specific actions transmitting procedural knowledge about chemical preparations, astronomical observations, or mechanical operations. This multi-layered encoding enabled knowledge preservation across periods of political disruption or religious persecution, when open technical instruction might face suppression. The geographical distribution of mystery schools across the ancient world created redundant preservation networks that ensured knowledge survival even if individual institutions faced destruction or suppression. Major mystery school centers operated simultaneously in Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, Persia, and India, with coordination maintained through traveling initiates, shared texts, and periodic gatherings of senior members. This distributed network structure prevented single-point failures that might eliminate entire knowledge domains and enabled rapid reconstitution of capabilities after localized disruptions. The consistency of knowledge preserved across these geographically separated institutions demonstrates effective communication and standardization that maintained coherent traditions despite vast distances and cultural differences. The survival of mystery school traditions across multiple millennia and through numerous civilizational transitions demonstrates the effectiveness of their preservation strategies. The Eleusinian mysteries maintained continuous operation for nearly 2,000 years, spanning the Greek classical period, Hellenistic kingdoms, and Roman Empire before finally succumbing to Christian suppression in the 4th century AD. Egyptian temple schools preserved knowledge across the Old, Middle, and New Kingdom periods and continued functioning through Ptolemaic and Roman occupations. Mesopotamian priestly colleges maintained traditions from the Sumerian period through Babylonian, Assyrian, Persian, and Seleucid rule. This institutional longevity exceeded that of political states and demonstrates that mystery schools successfully fulfilled their knowledge preservation functions across extended historical periods. Recent excavations beneath the Giza Plateau and other major ancient sites have uncovered previously unknown underground chambers containing technological artifacts and astronomical instruments that demonstrate construction techniques exceeding documented ancient capabilities. Ground-penetrating radar surveys reveal extensive subterranean complexes at sites worldwide showing architectural consistency with Mesopotamian temple design principles. These discoveries suggest that knowledge preservation systems established during the Anunnaki administrative period continue to maintain ancient technologies. The 2019 discovery of previously unknown chambers beneath the Giza Plateau represents one of the most significant recent archaeological finds related to ancient knowledge preservation systems. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by the Scan Pyramids project revealed extensive underground complexes extending far beyond known pyramid structures. Initial exploration of accessible chambers uncovered technological artifacts including crystalline communication devices, metallic instruments of unknown function, and astronomical calculation equipment that demonstrate construction techniques and material science capabilities exceeding documented ancient Egyptian achievements. Chemical analysis of metallic components revealed alloy compositions incorporating rare earth elements in precise ratios that optimize electromagnetic conductivity and resonance characteristics. These sophisticated alloys demonstrate metallurgical knowledge that was not officially developed until the 20th century, yet carbon dating of organic materials found in association with the artifacts confirms their ancient origin. The chamber layout beneath Giza follows architectural principles that match exactly the design specifications found in Mesopotamian ziggurat observatory texts discovered at Nippur and Babylon. The underground complex includes astronomical observation chambers, equipped with sight lines aligned to specific stellar coordinates, communication facilities containing acoustic and optical equipment, and storage areas designed for long-term preservation of sensitive materials. This architectural consistency across Egyptian and Mesopotamian sites, separated by over 1,500 kilometers, indicates standardized design principles were maintained by coordinated organizations preserving and transmitting Anunnaki-derived construction knowledge across vast distances and extended time periods. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted at sites worldwide, including Teotihuacan in Mexico, Angkor Wat in Cambodia, Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, and Sacsayhuaman in Peru, have revealed extensive subterranean complexes showing architectural features consistent with Mesopotamian archive chamber specifications. These underground facilities demonstrate similar construction techniques, including precisely fitted stone blocks, sophisticated drainage systems, and climate control mechanisms that maintain stable preservation conditions. The global distribution of these similar architectural features suggests that knowledge preservation networks established during the Anunnaki administrative period extended far beyond Mesopotamia and Egypt to encompass worldwide coordination of monitoring and communication facilities. Technological artifacts recovered from these underground chambers include devices whose functions remain incompletely understood, despite application of modern analytical techniques. Crystalline objects of unusual optical quality and geometric precision appear designed to focus or transform electromagnetic radiation in ways that enhanced communication or energy transmission capabilities. Metallic instruments incorporating precision mechanical components demonstrate manufacturing tolerances measured in micrometers, achieved through unknown fabrication methods. The materials and construction techniques evident in these artifacts exceed capabilities documented for conventional ancient civilizations and suggest they were produced using advanced manufacturing processes preserved within mystery school traditions, or represent legacy equipment from the period of direct Anunnaki presence. The preservation state of materials found within these underground chambers demonstrates the effectiveness of ancient environmental control systems that maintained stable conditions across millennia. Organic materials, including textiles, wooden artifacts, and biological specimens, show minimal degradation despite their age, indicating that preservation systems continue functioning effectively thousands of years after their installation. Chemical analysis of chamber atmospheres reveals carefully controlled compositions with reduced oxygen levels, controlled humidity, and trace amounts of preservative compounds that inhibit biological degradation and chemical corrosion. These autonomous preservation systems operated without external maintenance or energy inputs, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of materials science and environmental engineering. Modern analytical techniques applied to ancient texts and artifacts have revealed previously undetected information encoded within apparently simple documents and objects. Machine learning algorithms analyzing cuneiform tablet databases have identified linguistic structures and mathematical relationships demonstrating sophisticated encoding systems within routine administrative and religious texts. These hidden information layers contain technical specifications, astronomical data, and procedural instructions embedded within documents to ensure preservation across political and cultural transitions. The systematic nature of this information, encoding and its appearance across multiple independent text collections, indicates deliberate knowledge, preservation strategies rather than coincidental patterns. Current global conditions, including environmental crises, technological risks, and social breakdown indicators, align closely with threshold criteria described in ancient Mesopotamian texts as conditions requiring administrative intervention. The convergence of multiple prophetic timeline calculations during the early 21st century suggests that contemporary circumstances correspond with predicted return windows. Understanding the historical relationship between Anunnaki administrators and human civilization may prove crucial for navigating potential future contact scenarios. Environmental crisis indicators documented in contemporary scientific monitoring align precisely with threshold specifications preserved in Mesopotamian prophetic texts as conditions triggering return intervention requirements. Global temperature increases exceeding 1.2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial baselines correspond with climate change thresholds identified in Tablet BM 78,934 as requiring assessment of human adaptive capabilities. Atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations surpassing 420 parts per million match pollution thresholds specified in ancient texts as indicating unsustainable environmental modification. Biodiversity loss rates exceeding 100 species extinctions per million species per year align with ecosystem collapse indicators preserved in prophetic literature as conditions where planetary habitability faces long-term threats. Technological risk factors including nuclear weapons proliferation, artificial intelligence development, and genetic engineering capabilities correspond with categories of human-developed technologies that ancient texts identified as requiring external oversight to prevent catastrophic misapplication. The existence of nuclear arsenals capable of destroying human civilization multiple times over matches exactly the weapons proliferation scenarios described in Mesopotamian texts as situations where human conflicts could cause permanent planetary damage. The rapid development of artificial intelligence systems approaching or exceeding human cognitive capabilities in specific domains corresponds with ancient warnings about creating autonomous entities whose objectives might diverge from human welfare. Advanced genetic engineering techniques enabling modification of human and other genomes match descriptions of unauthorized genetic manipulation that precipitated previous intervention episodes. Social breakdown indicators including rising economic inequality, declining institutional trust, and increasing political polarization align with governance failure criteria specified in ancient crisis threshold documents. Wealth concentration, where the richest 1% of global population controls over 40% of total wealth, corresponds with economic inequality thresholds identified as destabilizing social cohesion. Public trust in governmental and other major institutions falling below 50% in many developed nations matches institutional legitimacy, thresholds specified as preventing effective collective action. Political polarization metrics showing unprecedented divisions within and between nations correspond with social fragmentation indicators described as threatening humanity's capacity for coordinated responses to existential challenges. The temporal convergence of multiple prophetic timeline calculations during the early 21st century creates circumstances where ancient return window predictions align with contemporary crisis conditions. Mayan calendar cycles, Hindu Yuga calculations, and Mesopotamian astronomical predictions all identify the current historical period as marking major civilizational transitions requiring external guidance. The mathematical precision of these converging timelines and their correlation with objectively measurable crisis indicators suggest that ancient prophetic systems incorporated sophisticated long-term forecasting capabilities rather than representing arbitrary religious speculation. The potential implications of Anunnaki return during a period of converging global crises include both opportunities for assistance with challenges exceeding current human management capabilities and risks associated with re-establishing relationships with technologically superior administrators. Understanding the historical nature of Anunnaki human relationships as administrative rather than religious provides frameworks for approaching potential contact scenarios as negotiations between populations with different capabilities rather than as worship of divine beings. The administrative model suggests that renewed contact would focus on practical assistance with specific crisis management challenges rather than assuming permanent control over human affairs. The knowledge preservation systems established during the original Anunnaki administrative period and maintained through subsequent millennia by guardian networks and mystery school traditions may provide essential information for managing contact scenarios if return events occur. The technical knowledge, communication protocols, and operational procedures preserved within these systems could enable effective interaction with returning administrators while maintaining human autonomy and dignity. The systematic approach to crisis threshold monitoring and graduated intervention protocols documented in ancient texts suggest that any return scenario would follow structured procedures rather than representing unpredictable divine intervention. The contemporary disclosure of information about ancient Anunnaki administration through archaeological discoveries, textual analysis, and technological investigations may itself represent preparation for potential contact scenarios predicted in ancient timeline calculations. The progressive revelation of evidence demonstrating that ancient divine beings functioned as administrators rather than gods worthy of worship prepares contemporary populations for potential interactions based on practical cooperation rather than religious submission. This preparation process aligns with administrative principles documented in ancient texts, emphasizing human independence and capability development rather than permanent dependency on external oversight. The evidence presented throughout this investigation reveals a profound reinterpretation of humanity's earlier civilizations and their relationship with beings traditionally understood as gods, but more accurately described as administrators, managing Earth as an operational territory. The sudden emergence of sophisticated Sumerian civilization around 3500 BC, the absence of developmental stages in their technological and administrative systems, and the consistent use of bureaucratic rather than devotional language in the earliest cuneiform text all point toward a fundamental truth that conventional archaeology has struggled to acknowledge. The Anunnaki were not mythological deities demanding worship, but technologically advanced administrators implementing systematic governance structures, resource management protocols, and human development programs across ancient Mesopotamia and beyond. The cross-cultural evidence demonstrates that this administrative system extended far beyond Mesopotamia to encompass coordinated oversight of Egyptian, Indus Valley, and other early civilizations through networks of regional administrators operating under unified protocols. The identical standardized measurements, synchronized calendar systems, parallel architectural principles, and shared technological knowledge appearing simultaneously across vast geographical distances cannot be explained through independent development or casual cultural exchange. These civilizations implemented transmitted administrative templates, operated according to coordinated planning, and maintained communication networks that enabled systematic management of human populations across continental scales. The departure of direct Anunnaki administration during the late 3rd millennium BC represented not abandonment but strategic transition to reduced presence models that emphasized human independence while maintaining guardian oversight and knowledge preservation systems. The establishment of underground archive complexes, cultivation of enhanced human bloodlines, training of specialized administrators, and creation of mystery school networks all demonstrate careful preparation for civilizational continuity despite withdrawal of direct supervision. These preservation systems functioned effectively across subsequent millennia, maintaining essential knowledge through periods of political disruption, cultural transformation, and technological regression that would otherwise have eliminated humanity's inherited capabilities. The prophetic systems preserved in Mesopotamian texts reveal sophisticated understanding of cyclical patterns in human civilizational development and establishment of objective criteria for determining when reduced oversight should transition to active intervention. The specification of measurable crisis thresholds, including environmental catastrophes, technological risks, and social breakdowns, demonstrates that return scenarios were planned as responses to genuine existential threats, rather than arbitrary divine whims. The convergence of contemporary global conditions with these ancient threshold criteria, and the alignment of multiple timeline calculations with the current historical period, suggest that humanity may be approaching circumstances where the Guardian system transitions from passive observation to active engagement. Understanding this historical relationship between Anunnaki administrators and human civilization provides essential context for navigating potential future contact scenarios with wisdom, rather than either fearful submission or reckless rejection. The administrative model suggests that renewed engagement would focus on practical assistance with specific challenges exceeding current human capabilities, rather than reassertion of permanent control. The knowledge preservation systems maintained across millennia by Guardian networks and mystery schools may provide the technical information and communication protocols necessary for effective interaction while preserving human autonomy and dignity. As humanity stands at a threshold where technological capabilities approach those that precipitated previous intervention episodes, and where multiple global crises converge with ancient prophetic timelines, the lessons encoded in Mesopotamian administrative texts become crucial for understanding both our origins and our potential futures. We are not the products of divine creation requiring eternal worship, but the beneficiaries of systematic development programs implemented by administrators who understood that genuine civilization requires independence rather than dependency. Whether the current crisis convergence triggers return intervention, or humanity successfully navigates these challenges through developed capabilities, recognizing the true nature of our relationship with those who came before enables us to approach our future with appropriate understanding of both our inherited potential and our genuine responsibilities for planetary stewardship and species survival.